Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another spooky movie for you today. And I have a great one that you may not have actually heard about. That film being Jacques Tourneur's 1957 classic, Night of the Demon. Also called Curse of the Demon, the film follows American psychologist John Holden, who is traveling to London to attend a symposium on the paranormal, where he intends to expose the cultist Julian Carswell. Holden is a skeptic, and so when he discovers that Carswell has slipped a piece of parchment with an ancient curse foretelling his death into his papers, he initially shrugs it off as a harmless scare tactic. But he soon sees things that make him question his beliefs, and must now race against the clock to reverse Carswell's spell. So as I said, Night of the Demon, or as it was called in the US, Curse of the Demon, was a horror film directed by Jacques Tourneur. It was based on the short story Casting the Runes by M.R. James, who was one of the most influential ghost story writers of the 20th century. And likewise, though he's often not acknowledged for it, Jacques Tourneur was really one of the most influential horror directors of the 20th century. You see, he really made a name for himself directing the earliest Val Lewton horror films, Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, and The Leopard Man. Now I know just hearing those titles, they sound like some of the corniest B-movies ever made, and that was honestly part of the challenge in making them. Lewton would be given these titles by the studio, and he would have to work with the writers and directors to make something artistically satisfying enough for him, while still being entertaining enough to bring in an audience. And he had a really good string of these horror films he made for RKO during the 40s that are so dreamy and imaginative, while also finding new and inventive ways to create horror. Given they were making these films on a low budget, often having to reuse sets from other films such as The Staircase from the Magnificent Ambersons, Lewton had to come up with creative ways to make the audience feel like they were seeing more than they actually were. Luckily, he had some very talented directors to help with this, such as Robert Wise, Mark Robeson, and the director of this film, Jacques Tourneur. And he was the one who Lewton really figured out the rules for making a good horror film with. First off, he learned don't show the creature. Even though it sounds contrary to the usual show don't tell mantra, they discovered that if you just give the impression of the creature being there, which can be done quite effectively through dark, moody lighting and carefully used sound design, the audience will actually do the rest in their mind and will likely be more engaged with the film because of it. They also kind of pioneered the jump scare, and though nowadays it's kind of seen by some as a cheap trick, the atmosphere and dreamlike state of these older films keep these moments feeling fresh, as they are done infrequently enough as to not seem overused, and are almost always done with a real motivation behind them, such as the famous bus scene in Cat People. But all that to say, Tourneur was a master of his craft, and though by the making of Night of the Demon in 1956, he had largely moved on from his horror days, having directed successes in nearly every genre, most notably what many considered to be the pinnacle of film noir out of the past. But when Tourneur got the script for Night of the Demon, he was not getting the big budget opportunities anymore, so he saw it as a way to sort of return to his roots. And Tourneur incorporates much of what he learned from his Val Lewton days into Night of the Demon. As much as the film's advertising and posters show off the creature, the film is much more about the atmosphere and psychology of the characters, questioning whether or not the creature's really there or just in their minds, as all of the deaths it causes end up appearing more like accidents. And if Tourneur had his way, you wouldn't have actually seen the demon at the beginning of the film at all. He had originally planned to shoot the film without showing the creature until the very end, much closer to how they had done on Cat People. But given this film was coming out in the 50s, there was a bit of a different expectation with what viewers wanted to see with the rise of monster movies, and so producer Hallie Chester apparently came in and shot his own scenes with the monster and put them in after the fact. Now thankfully the monster design and effects were actually very good for its time, so they don't really end up coming off like these scenes were inserted later. But it does mean that, of course, all of the posters and trailers have the demon slapped on front and center, which I think kind of hurts the film's perception, as it's not really about the creature as much as it's about creating this feeling of impending doom and believing in things you cannot see while also getting caught up in things you really can't control. Something really a lot more complex than what you may expect from what appears to be simply another monster movie. So though the appearance of the monster is heavily debated, the effects are actually very well done, especially for the time. Seeing it emerge from the smoke and fog in the woods just looks so beautifully ominous, and the lightning flashes in the darkness does help obscure it some to still give it that spooky effect. They use a combination of different rigs, machines, and suits which vary enough to make the creature's form a bit harder to pin down. And the design has become very iconic and kind of a staple in horror films nowadays. It was actually heavily based on old wood carvings and ancient drawings of demons, so there was a clear attention to detail when designing it. And this makes sense when you learn that the production design was headed by Ken Adam, who went on to become one of the best in his field, designing for most of the early James Bond films, along with Stanley Kubrick classics like Barry Lyndon and Dr. Strangelove. And another notable aspect of this film is that it was kind of an early example of folk horror, which has since become a pretty popular subgenre along with films like The Witchfinder General, The Wicker Man, and most recently Midsummer. As we see Holden trying to investigate the origins of the curse, he is shown looking at the runes on Stonehenge, and even speaking with some of the farmers who believe in the folklore of the area. Even the atmospheric opening shot of Stonehenge and the narration is all about the age and antiquity of this curse. And another interesting aspect of this film is the various versions of it that exist. So though this film is most often called Night of the Demon, it was actually released in the US as Curse of the Demon and was shortened to about 83 minutes from the original release's 96-minute runtime, trimming down and completely removing a number of scenes to help it better fit onto a double bill. And overall, I think the film works better in its full length, as it has fewer gaps in its plot and rounds out the characters a bit more, but I have to say the first time I watched it was in its shortened 83-minute version, and I still became a huge fan of it. The film already has this great spooky atmosphere and feels kind of dreamy at times, so it's pretty easy to overlook some of the gaps with the plot and character, and it runs at an even quicker pace, so I wouldn't worry too much about which version you see first, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And the script was written by Charles Bennett, who is quite well regarded, writing many of Hitchcock's early classics, including The 39 Steps, Foreign Correspondent, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. And he does a wonderful job of expanding the story and fleshing out characters while still keeping the heart of M.R. James's work intact. And his script is ultimately the framework that makes this film the classic it is today, as along with Tourneur's visuals and the demon itself, the characters are really what have kept people coming back to this film after all these years. And speaking of characters, I think that's a good segue to talk about the film's cast. So to start us off, Dana Andrews is great as the skeptic Dr. John Holden. He wasn't really known for horror films, but he was very good friends with Tourneur, and I think this separation from the genre does kind of help give his character a bit more credibility, as he is not your usual horror film actor. So because of this, he really does feel like a fish out of water, like his character is supposed to be. And as good as Dana Andrews is in this film, Nial MacGinnis' performance as Julian Carswell is what most people are probably going to be coming away thinking of. He really subverts all of your expectations of how an evil satanic cult leader should act. He is intimidating for sure, but also way more polite than you would expect. After a while you get the idea that he doesn't really even enjoy being scary, but rather is more of this magician who has gotten too far in with the wrong kind of magic and is now too nervous of the power he has evoked, as he knows he can't really control it as well as he lets on. And so behind his haughty front, he is actually quite worried about his plan backfiring, and is just trying whatever he can to survive. Peggy Cummins is wonderful as Joanna Harrington, niece to the first victim, Professor Harrington, and she acts as a bit of a counterpoint to Holden's staunch disbelief, as she is a bit more open-minded to these strange occurrings. And if you think she looks familiar, film noir fans may remember her as the quick-shooting marksman turned bank robber from Gun Crazy. And Athene Seyler is also great here as Mrs. Carswell, and does a lot to further solidify Nial MacGinnis' performance as this unusual villain, as she herself tries to find a way to save him. And a familiar face to anyone who saw my previous video on the Ghost of Mr. Chicken, Liam Redmond is actually here as well. Not as Kelsey the gardener, but as Mark O'Brien, one of Holden's colleagues who has come to the convention and tries to help him figure out the meaning of the curse. So in short, Night of the Demon, or Curse of the Demon, whichever you want to call it, is just an incredible film that really punches above its weight. It may seem on the outside like just another monster movie, and it certainly is able to serve that function, but the filmmakers were able to bring a whole additional level of psychology, atmosphere, and suspense to the film that make it quite unique in itself, and one that's nearly impossible to forget. As I hinted earlier, this has become a bit of a pop culture touchstone in the horror genre, and many popular films and TV shows make reference to it in one way or another. And a fun fact, the line, "It's in the trees! It's coming!" is even pulled straight out of the film to open Kate Bush's song, Hounds of Love. So if you want to watch Night of the Demon, it is available from most of the usual places as a rent or buy option, and often pops up on sites like Tubi and Shudder every once in a while as well, though keep in mind they are likely using the 83-minute Curse of the Demon cut, and there are also a number of other films with similar titles to Night of the Demon, so make sure you search out for the 1957 version if you're having trouble tracking it down. And physically though, there is a very nice Blu-ray from Indicator, which has several different cuts of the film, along with a whole disc of bonus features. So this is a very complete Blu-ray that is well worth looking into if you love this film, and thankfully, even though Indicator is a British company, the disc is actually region free, so it will play on any Blu-ray player. So now for my comment question, I'm wondering, what is your favorite film based on an existing story? Now this can be anything, comic book, short story, or even a huge Stephen King novel. I love seeing different adaptations of a story and see the different paths each one takes throughout the plot. Even if they only keep the basic framework of the original and throw out the rest, I always find it fun to see what different people do with an idea. So go ahead and put your favorites in the comment section below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. Remember to keep watching movies, and I will see you again soon.